quiet drive turns into a nightmare when flashing red and blue lights appear in the rearview mirror. What happens next is something no one should have to experience. Before we dive in, let us know in the comments, have you ever witnessed an unfair situation like this? The grip on the steering wheel was tight, knuckles white, nails pressing into the leather. Alyssa Grant forced a slow, steady breath, keeping her eyes locked on the road ahead. She wasn't speeding, she hadn't run a light, and yet, in her rear-view mirror, the unmistakable glow of red and blue flickered behind her. Her heartbeat quickened. This wasn't the first time she'd been pulled over, but something about this felt different. The police cruiser stayed on her tail for too long, waiting, almost hunting. A slow, deliberate game of intimidation, the kind she'd read about, the kind she'd defended clients against. Alyssa pulled onto the shoulder, reaching instinctively for her purse. Her ID, registration, everything was in order. She placed her hands on the wheel before the officer even stepped out. Footsteps approached, heavy and firm against the asphalt. Alyssa rolled her window down just enough. "License and registration," the officer barked. No greeting, no explanation. She kept her voice even. "Of course, officer. May I ask why I'm being pulled over?" The officer, a white man in his mid-40s, ignored the question. His sunglasses reflected the glow of the streetlights as he tapped a finger impatiently against the roof of her car. Alyssa moved carefully, reaching into her glove compartment, pulling out the documents. She handed them over, but he barely looked at them. "Step out of the vehicle." Alyssa blinked. "Excuse me?" "Step out of the vehicle." Her fingers twitched against the steering wheel. She had handled police cases before, worked within the justice system long enough to know her rights. "Officer, I haven't been informed of any violation. Am I being detained?" The second officer appeared at the passenger's side, younger, with a nervous energy. His hand rested near his holster. The first officer, the older one, exhaled sharply. "We're investigating a reported car theft in this area," he said, his voice flat. "Your vehicle matches the description." Alyssa kept her expression calm, but inside, anger coiled in her chest. "This is my car," she said, her tone firm. "Registered under my name. You have my identification." "Step out of the car, ma'am." Alyssa inhaled deeply. If she refused, this could escalate. If she complied, it could still escalate. She unbuckled her seatbelt, opened the door, and stood. The moment her feet hit the ground, the younger officer moved. Rough hands grabbed her wrist, twisting it behind her back. "Hey!" Alyssa gasped. Cold steel tightened around her wrist. Then the other. "This is unnecessary," she protested, twisting her head to look at them. "Ma'am, you're being detained until we sort this out," the first officer said, pressing down on her shoulder to keep her still. "Detained for what?" Alyssa snapped. "You have no probable cause. You're driving a stolen vehicle," the officer cut in. Her head jerked up. "That's a but her voice was swallowed by the sound of her own heartbeat hammering against her ribs. She felt the stares from passing cars, the humiliation, the fury. "This is my car," she repeated through clenched teeth. "Run the plates, check my registration. This is wrongful detainment." The officers exchanged glances. "We'll handle that at the station," the older one muttered. Alyssa's breath hitched. They weren't listening. They didn't care. And that's when she realized. This wasn't about the car. This was about power. Her jaw tightened as she locked eyes with the officer in front of her. "Call my brother." The officer snickered. "Oh yeah," the younger one smirked. "And who's your brother?" Alyssa tilted her chin up. "Darius Grant, United States Attorney." Silence. The first officer stiffened, his grip loosening slightly. The younger officer's smirk faltered, his fingers twitching near his belt. Alyssa saw it then. The crack. The hesitation. They weren't expecting that. Her heartbeat slowed, replaced with something colder, sharper. They had made a mistake, and they were about to find out just how big of one. Alyssa could feel the weight of the handcuffs digging into her wrists as the officers exchanged uncertain glances. The once confident smirks had wavered, though they tried to mask it. The name Darius Grant carried a weight they weren't expecting. She wasn't just some black woman they could push around. Yeah, right, the younger officer scoffed, though his voice lacked the same arrogance from before. And I'm the president's nephew. Alyssa remained perfectly still, her breathing controlled, her heartbeat steadying. They could mock her all they wanted. She knew exactly what was about to happen. Call him, she said, her voice unwavering. Right now. Or I will. The older officer took a step forward, pulling out her phone from the pocket of her blazer. You said his name is Darius Grant? U.S. Attorney Darius Grant, she corrected, her eyes locked on his. You might want to check the DOJ website while you're at it. The officer hesitated, his thumb hovering over the screen as if debating whether to humor her. He glanced at his partner, then back at her, before sighing. What's his number? Alyssa held his gaze, refusing to let him see the slightest hint of relief. Speed dial 2. He'll answer. The younger officer folded his arms, shifting his weight uncomfortably. The bravado from earlier had drained from his stance. He knew something was wrong. The older officer tapped the phone screen, bringing it to his ear. For a moment the only sound was the distant hum of traffic. Then the ringing stopped. This is Darius Grant. Alyssa watched as the officer stiffened. She didn't have to see his expression to know that reality was setting in. This is Officer Reynolds with the, He cleared his throat, trying to regain control. 9th Precinct. We have a woman here who claims to be your sister. Silence. Then, Darius's voice, sharp and commanding. You mean Alyssa? What the hell is going on? The younger officer shifted uneasily. The older one swallowed, clearly regretting this call. We pulled her over. Routine stop. There was a report of a stolen vehicle matching. Is this a joke? Darius cut in, his voice hard. You're saying my sister, a licensed attorney with the state, is in a stolen vehicle? Are you out of your damn mind? Alyssa saw it then. The moment Officer Reynolds realized just how badly they had messed up. His eyes darted to her, then to his partner. Sir, we were just following protocol. No, Darius snapped. You were following bias. You saw a black woman in a nice car and you pulled her over. Am I wrong? Reynolds didn't answer. That's what I thought. Darius continued. Listen to me very carefully. You're going to take those handcuffs off right now. You are going to return everything you took from her, and then you are going to apologize. Reynolds swallowed hard. Sir, You have exactly 30 seconds before I call the chief of police, the mayor, and the goddamn DOJ. And trust me, by the time I'm done, neither of you will be wearing that badge. Alyssa's lips curled into a small, satisfied smile as she watched the color drain from the officer's face. Reynolds yanked the phone away from his ear. His hand shook slightly as he fumbled for the key, the metal clicking loudly as he unlocked the cuffs. The moment her wrists were free, Alyssa rolled them, the ache sharp but manageable. You good? Darius' voice was still on speaker. She lifted her hands, rubbing her wrists before replying. I'm good. Are they still standing there? Reynolds flinched. Alyssa's gaze swept between them. Yeah, they are. Good, Darius said, because I want to hear them say it. A tense silence stretched between them. The younger officer glanced at his partner, his jaw clenched. Alyssa waited. Reynolds inhaled sharply before muttering, Louder, Darius demanded. I apologize, Reynolds repeated, barely concealing his frustration. For what? Alyssa crossed her arms. For the wrongful detainment, he said through gritted teeth. Alyssa tilted her head, satisfied. That wasn't so hard, was it? Reynolds stiffened. The younger officer was already inching back toward their cruiser, desperate to escape. Darius sighed into the phone. Alyssa, get in your car and go. I'll handle this. Alyssa nodded, not bothering to say another word. She took her phone from Reynolds, her fingers brushing his as she pulled it from his grasp. The discomfort in his face was obvious. Without looking back, she turned on her heel and slid into the driver's seat, shutting the door with a firm thud. The officers scurried back to their patrol car, barely making eye contact. She watched as they drove off, tires screeching against the pavement in their hurry to get as far away from her as possible. She let out a slow breath, her fingers tightening around the wheel. It was over. For now. But as she merged back onto the road, she knew one thing for certain. This wouldn't be the last time she had to remind people exactly who she was. And the next time, she would need to call her brother. Alyssa's hands trembled slightly as she gripped the steering wheel, not from fear. No, that wasn't it. It was anger. A cold, simmering fury that settled deep in her bones, refusing to fade even as the city lights blurred past her. She should be home by now. She should have been pouring herself a glass of wine, kicking off her heels, unwinding after a long day. But instead she was still replaying the last 30 minutes in her head, the tight grip of the handcuffs, the way those officers had looked at her like she was less than human. Her phone buzzed against the center console. Darius. She exhaled through her nose, pressing the button on her car's Bluetooth. I'm fine. A beat of silence. Then, I didn't ask yet. You didn't have to, she muttered. Darius sighed. I just got off the phone with the precinct. They're scrambling. Good, Alyssa. His tone softened. Talk to me. She clenched her jaw. What was there to say? That she was tired? That it didn't matter how many degrees she had, how many cases she won, or how many times she played by the rules? Because at the end of the day, they still saw her as a threat? I handled it, she said instead. You shouldn't have had to. That part she couldn't argue with. Darius was quiet for a moment. You're not letting this go, are you? She let out a sharp laugh. Oh, I'm just getting started. Her brother chuckled, but there was no humor in it. That's what I thought. Her car slowed as she pulled into her apartment complex, the familiar sight of the gated entrance giving her a sliver of comfort. I'll call you tomorrow. Alyssa. She hesitated. Don't carry this alone. She swallowed, gripping the steering wheel a little tighter. Good night, Dee. She ended the call before he could respond. By the time she stepped into her apartment, exhaustion finally caught up with her. The weight of the evening pressed down on her shoulders, the kind of exhaustion that had nothing to do with physical tiredness. She kicked off her heels, tossing her blazer onto the couch, before making a beeline for the kitchen. Wine. She needed wine. She reached for the bottle on the counter when a sharp knock at her door made her freeze. Her pulse quickened. It was late. Too late for visitors. She set the bottle down and moved toward the door, peering through the peephole. A man stood there, mid-30s, clean-cut, wearing a suit. Not a cop, not someone she recognized. She didn't open the door. Who is it? Ms. Grant, my name is Daniel Carter. I'm an investigator with the Civilian Oversight Committee. Her brow furrowed. It's almost midnight, Mr. Carter. I know. I apologize for the hour, but I wanted to reach you before this situation escalates. Alyssa hesitated before unlocking the door, keeping the chain in place as she cracked it open. Escalates? He slipped a business card through the gap. I heard what happened tonight. Officers Reynolds and Parker made a huge mistake. I'd like to discuss your options. She studied him carefully. What's the catch? No catch, he said simply. Just the opportunity to hold them accountable. Her fingers tapped against the doorframe. May I come in? She considered it. Darius would tell her not to let strangers into her apartment. Her instincts screamed at her to be cautious. But another part of her, the part that had spent years fighting battles in courtrooms, the part that refused to let tonight go unanswered, told her this was exactly the kind of opportunity she needed. She unlatched the chain. "Come in." Carter stepped inside, glancing around her apartment briefly before turning back to her. "I'll be direct," he said, folding his hands together. "Reynolds and Parker have complaints against them. This isn't their first incident." Lisa folded her arms. "And yet they're still on the force. Internal affairs work slow, too slow," he met her gaze. "But your case, this is different. This is national." She arched a brow. "How so?" Carter pulled out his phone, tapping the screen a few times before turning it toward her. A news alert flashed across the screen. "Attorney wrongfully detained in possible racial profiling case. U.S. Attorney's Office involved." Her stomach flipped. "Who leaked this?" she demanded. Carter shrugged. "Does it matter?" She narrowed her eyes at him. "It does if someone's trying to use me as a pawn." "Miss Grant," he said, his tone measured, "the only people who get to decide what happens next are you and your brother." She exhaled slowly, running a hand through her curls. This was moving fast. "What do you want from me?" A statement, on the record. "We want to push for immediate disciplinary action." She scoffed. "You think a slap on the wrist is enough?" "No," he admitted. "But it's a start, and if we push hard enough, it could lead to real consequences." Alyssa paced the living room, her mind racing. She wanted more than consequences. She wanted change. She turned back to him. "I'll do it, but only if I get to be part of the process." Carter nodded. "That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say." Alyssa clenched her fists, her jaw tightening. She wasn't done. Not by a long shot. The courthouse steps were colder than she expected. Maybe it was the morning breeze, or maybe it was the weight of what she was about to do. Alyssa stood tall, her back straight, her hands folded calmly in front of her. The cameras were already rolling, news anchors whispering into their microphones, waiting for her to step up to the podium. She had expected a crowd, but the sheer size of it, reporters, activists, community leaders, even fellow attorneys, was overwhelming. Darius stood beside her, his face unreadable but his presence unwavering. He had fought battles like this before. He knew what was at stake. "You don't have to do this," he murmured under his breath. Alyssa glanced at him, lips curving slightly. "Yes, I do." The courthouse doors creaked open behind them, and Daniel Carter gave her a small nod, signaling it was time. She stepped forward, the murmurs dying down as the crowd turned their full attention on her. The flashing cameras, the anticipation. It didn't shake her. She had been preparing for this moment her entire life. She took a breath. "My name is Alyssa Grant. I am an attorney, a citizen, and a black woman in America. Last night I was wrongfully detained by officers of the 9th Precinct. Despite following every instruction, despite presenting my identification, I was treated as a suspect before I was treated as a person." A hush fell over the crowd. She continued, her voice steady. "This is not a rare occurrence. This is not an isolated incident. And that is exactly why I am standing here today." She saw the officers watching from the far end of the steps, arms folded, jaws clenched. Good. Let them listen. Let them feel the weight of what they had done. "I have filed a formal complaint against Officers Reynolds and Parker," she stated firmly, "and I will not stop there. This is bigger than me. This is about every single person who has been pulled over, questioned, detained, or worse, simply because of the color of their skin." Darius nodded slightly, a silent approval of every word she was saying. Alyssa looked directly into the cameras. "There will be an independent investigation into their actions, and I will ensure it does not get buried. I have also filed a civil rights violation case, because enough is enough." The system that allows this kind of abuse to continue must be held accountable. There was a ripple in the crowd, murmurs of support, the sound of people shifting, nodding, agreeing. A reporter raised a hand. "Miss Grant, are you seeking their termination?" Alyssa didn't hesitate. "I am seeking justice." Another voice cut through. "Do you believe your connection to the U.S. Attorney's Office helped your case?" Alyssa's lips pressed into a thin line. "Yes. And that's the problem. No one should need to have a powerful relative to demand fair treatment from law enforcement. That is why I will not stop fighting until everyone, regardless of their last name, their job title, or their bank account, is treated with the same dignity and respect." A round of applause broke out, small but growing. She stepped back from the podium, the moment sinking in. Darius squeezed her shoulder. "You handled that like a pro," he said. She exhaled, nodding. "It's not over yet." "It's a start," he admitted. Carter approached, sliding a folder into her hands. "Internal Affairs just released their statement. The officers are being put on administrative leave pending the investigation. It's something—" Lisa scanned the document, a sharp exhale leaving her lips. It wasn't enough. Not yet. But it was something. She turned back to Darius. "You still got those press contacts?" He smirked. "You planning on making some noise?" "More than noise," she met his gaze. "I'm going to make sure no one ever forgets my name." Darius chuckled, proud. "Now that's my little sister." They walked down the courthouse steps together, the weight on her chest feeling lighter. There was still work to do, but for the first time in a long time she felt something close to victory. And that was only the beginning.